The team either says, we can hold on to you, or we can get something, and getting something instead of nothing, and getting worse in the process in what people say is a great draft. It's the way of pro sports.
Man, there was a time here, Danny, obviously, where the Blackhawks were the number one sports story in town for a good long while and won 3 cups in 6 years. And he was right in the middle of all of it. A number 1 overall draft pick. Great stuff from Tanny right there. Number 1 overall. And here the Bears are with number 1 overall. Imagine getting it that right. That you take a guy number 1 overall and he ends up being the second leading scorer in the history of your franchise. 16 seasons. He's number 2. Stan Mikita played 22 seasons. He's number 1. He's behind Mikita and Hull for goals all time.
He's the best American hockey player ever. He's unbelievable goal scorer and all-around player. So he's the best Hawk ever. He's the best American-born player ever.
He's in the conversation for the best Hawk ever. That's for damn sure. And he's over Jonathan Toews for that because he remained productive for some years where Jonathan Toews has not.
Yeah, and I think when you factor in the winning, he's the best Hawk ever. I mean, I'm obviously not the most qualified person to do these sort of rankings, but when you're the best player on a team that wins 3 cups, it's pretty hard to argue that anyone has accomplished more. But he,
MVP trophy. You heard the Hart Trophy in there. That's MVP. Conn Smythe, that's playoff MVP. 9-time All-Star. I mean, it's crazy. The accomplishments are off the charts for a number 1 overall pick.
My relationship with that whole Hawks era is just different. I graduated college in 2009, came back, lived in Chicago, was unemployed, was playing poker, was living by Wrigley, was just being a complete degenerate. And they were like just at the beginning of they were good and about to win and that sort of thing. And then I left. And I went to Syracuse for basically a year, a little less, then went to Kansas City for 6 years. And so I never lived here when they actually won. I would come back and I would watch playoff games at bars with my friends, and I would watch playoff games when I was living away. And every time I would come back and see Hawks gear at O'Hare as the thing that was out in front over Cubs gear, I was like, what has happened to my town? My friends are all going out to watch Hawks games. What is going on? Girls wearing Hawks gear at Lincoln Park and Wrigleyville bars. What? This is it. It was a complete transformation. For a period of time that was not an insignificant period of time, Patrick Kane helped transform the sports culture of this city.
Absolutely. There's a ton of kids who found their way to hockey and wanted to wear number 88. That's the number you wanted to wear because that dude was flashy. He was fun. He chewed on his mouth guard after he would snipe and have these incredible goals. And yeah, man, I mean, they were... Because when I got here, Danny, for me, the situation was different because when I got here and started with Mac, June 15th, 2009, they were next. They had that feeling of that wonderful thing like the Cubs had in 2015, that we thought the White Sox had in 2020, that we're hoping the Bears feel like next year, that feeling of, oh, man, this thing should be really damn good. And I'm working with a hockey-crazed partner that we have shared in Dan McNeil.
Yeah.
And Toews goes number 3 overall. The very next year, Kane goes number 1 overall. They already have Keith and Seabrook. You're like, oh, my God, this thing is happening. And so I ended up being very close to some of those cup runs. Mac and I going to Philly and saw them win there on the ice after they won there. Going to Boston, saw them win there after 17 seconds. We're on the ice after they win 17 seconds. And the thing was always this. Toews was the first-line center. Toews was the captain, the tone setter, the heart and soul. And Kane was the second-line sniper. And the whole thing was like, who's going to be the second-line center? And they would cycle through all these different second-line centers. Who was going to play best with Kane? But every once in a while, when needed, we would talk about, in emergency break glass, put Kane on the first line. Kane and Toews on the first line. Get them together, and they always seem to make magic together. Then when Hossa got here, then he didn't need to do it. You had Hossa and Toews on the first line with Brandon Saad or whoever the third person would be. But Toews and Kane were kind of yin and yang because Toews was super disciplined and hard battler and didn't care about the glory and the scoring. And Kane was the flashy scoring guy who wanted all the glory and wanted all the everything.
Yeah, you could be just like the most rudimentary hockey observer ever, and you could see that he was different as a skater. He was just like faster than people.
Crazy fast.
It was like, oh, who's the best player on the ice? It's that guy.
Yeah, often looked like
it. It was an easy thing like to see, to understand. You didn't have to watch 80 regular season games to get it. It was like, oh, that guy's the best player on the ice. Duncan Keith was the same way. I never had the hockey scouting eye to tell you like who was a better defenseman than another. It was like, oh, that guy. He's constantly forechecking, knocking the puck away, disrupting something. It was like, oh, it was fair. He was so good that it made it look so easy.
And Keith could carry the puck into the zone and initiate the offense. Keith could be on the point on the power play, whereas Seabrook was more of a physical stay-at-home guy.
Yeah, and the that era of Blackhawks hockey for socially conscious people has been tarnished, if not ruined, because of what we learned was going on within the organization and what those players knew and what was being joked about inappropriately, obviously, and what was being covered up and excused in the name of winning. So celebrating them in the current evolved, frankly correct climate is different, and it deserves mention. As a player, he's an all-timer. As an era and what we knew was being excused for in the name of winning, it makes it feel icky and weird to fully celebrate without mentioning those other things. Yeah. Patrick Kane, still an all-time player, but he was a part of an era that is tarnished.
Yeah, absolutely. And his personal legacy as a dude is like, he was a partier, and you heard the cut that Tanny put in there. I know I've been getting myself under control, but watch out for me the next few days. And that was after they'd won, and Kane was always partying on the road, and you'd see stuff, it was. There were times when it certainly wasn't clean, and it doesn't feel clean now, but it doesn't take away from what he accomplished as a player. Let me ask it to you this way: since Jordan, where does Kane rank in terms of the biggest sports stars and most accomplished sports stars in this town? Is he at the top?
Well, is it most accomplished? Because he's number one. If it's most accomplished, he's number one. But biggest, you're going against hockey here, right? Because you could say
I'm looking for a way to quantify it without the hockey's place in the landscape damaging the conversation.
Yeah, he's number one.
That makes sense.
He's number one. Best player on 3 title teams? 1.
Best.
It's funny you mention that, Speaks, the Jordan comp, because the I'm not a huge hockey guy, obviously, but the vibe that the Blackhawks brought in those years where they're going to perennially be in the hunt for the Stanley Cup every year, it's a feeling that we haven't had around here since the Bulls era, for those folks that remember that era, where it's like you knew your team was damn good and they were going to be playing into the summer playoff months every year, and there was a certain atmosphere and a vibe to that was really enjoyable for those months when baseball was kind of barely even started yet at that point, but it did remind me a lot of the Bulls vibe. So I think it's funny you mentioned Jordan in that context.
Well,
I agree in a lot of ways.
And there was excitement. I mean, the excitement and the flashiness and we might have the dude all around the league. He's right there with the greatest goal scorers. It was like, oh my God, is it him or is it Ovechkin? Is it him or is it Malkin? Who is the greatest, flashiest, most fun scorer? He was right there, and to have that guy in your conversation.
And for someone like me who grew up not being able to watch the Hawks half the time, and I
didn't want you to.
I was a hockey kid along with I was crazy for all sports, but not being able to watch the Blackhawks at home because of the television stuff, and then being able to watch one of the biggest stars in the NHL every night and seeing what the vibe was like at the United Center, it was unbelievable.
I couldn't believe when I came back that the Hawks were a tough ticket. I was like, what?
I know, it was crazy.
I was like, wait a minute. You guys, a lot of my friends were traders and had a little money. They're like, it's a tough ticket to get Blackhawks tickets? What happened to this town?
That was the show in town.
What happened? That's insane. Yeah. It was a moment in time. I mean, his place on all-time Chicago athletes, it's tough for me to separate it from the impact of hockey, right? But in terms of pure accomplishments and superstardom, Jordan 1, Walter Payton 2, and then he gets to at least be in the conversation with Ernie Banks and Sammy Sosa and Frank Thomas.
He's top 10. I mean, there's a lot up there. But for a hockey guy to break through and even be top 10 is quite something.
Yeah, I mean, but those two are cemented. You know,
Jordan and Payton.
Jordan and Payton are 1 and 2 for Chicago. You know, not to do like the corny Mount Rushmore thing, but if you were talking about just like superstardom, he gets a mention. Ernie Banks,
yes. Big Frank.
Yeah, I mean, I said Frank. If you're also doing
Pippen,
if you're doing star appeal and celebrity,
how about Gale Sayers and Butkus?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say if you're doing star appeal, you have to mention Ditka, just for like sports figure.
Yes,
you know, but yeah, I mean, in terms of best player, Gale Sayers definitely should be in
Urlacher's up there for my
revolutionized a position.
My best since Jordan as well. Urlacher might be the one who battles the most with Kane, maybe Sosa,
Keith Traylor.
But Sosa is not a since Jordan. I mean,
no,
Sosa's summer of '98.
Yeah.
I mean, he did it technically a little after Jordan, but Sosa is a Jordan contemporary.
Yeah.
Pat Manley.
Pat Manley, obviously.
I don't know if any of
his own category.
I don't know if any of the 2016 Cubs really are gonna end up in that conversation, which is a crazy thing to think about.
Yeah, we would have not said that in 2016.
No way.
Or 17 or 18.
No way.
Because you would have said, oh, well, Bryant will win another one and he'll be a Cub for life, and Rizzo's Ernie Banks 2.0.
Right, and Rizzo's going to stick around and be there. Now, do you say Lester more than you say any of that position core?
If any of those guys come back, does it change your mind? Like if Rizzo comes back and ends his career as a Cub, does it change that a little bit?
Maybe so. If somebody comes back and has another chapter and goes out like that,
but it's not going to be Wilson Contreras.
No, it is not.
No, but I mean,
it's also not Derek Rose.
I know. I mean,
because of how long he was here and then what happened and how bad it went. Like Rose doesn't penetrate that.
Well, see, I don't know, man. Rose not having a title is obviously the thing that he has to be ranked below Kane in terms of that. But like as a beloved Chicago sports figure to a huge percentage of the city, he's the guy who made it out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
He's a hero to a huge percentage of the city.
Absolutely is.
And means something to the city that any of the names that we've mentioned doesn't mean in terms of that. So like it's a unique relationship with Derrick Rose and the city of Chicago and the West Side. And you know what I mean? It's just a different thing. Yeah. So he obviously, it got complicated and it got muddy and it was...
No, you're right.
He was emblematic of two Chicagos.
The city association and his story as the kid who made it out does add a lot of gravitas to it.
And man, I was at that Bulls-Knicks game this year where he hadn't played in days for the Knicks. He wasn't even cracking the lineup, and he got in a blowout because the Knicks were blowing him out. And it was the only ovation of the night at the United Center, and he was getting MVP chants.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Bulls fans love Derrick Rose by and large now. I know it got a little weird, you know, at times with comments and everything around here, but like he is a beloved figure and an all-time great. But not having a ring, obviously Kane has 3 of them. He's got to be below him. But I don't think in terms of impact, he doesn't. I think he deserves a seat at the table, even if it's like an outer table.
It's quite something. And now there he is. And just in the short term, I think he's gonna light it up, dude. Like he was.
I have no idea.
He was sleepwalking through the first couple of months. Well, you heard when we talked to Jay, like he was kind of sleepwalking through the first couple of months, and as the deadline has gotten closer, something woke up on him, and he had 7 goals in like 3 games or 4 games, including a hat trick. And almost scored in that overtime moment, is now going to go into New York to the place he wanted to play with Artemi Panarin, his old teammate. I wouldn't be surprised if
he still has plenty left.
Oh, he could win another one. He could absolutely be a part of a team that wins another one.
Sure. And I'm sure that would be a bummer. I don't have like emotional feelings around him leaving. I get why people would. It makes total sense. I mean, but I don't I just
Yeah.
I don't have emotional feelings on him leaving. And the sport is so weird with people talk about player empowerment in the NBA. Hockey players, they I want to be traded. I want to be traded to this team, or else I am not waiving my no movement clause, and that's that, and it's final. That's player empowerment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And bad players do it. At least in the NBA, it's like, oh, well, Kevin Durant held the team hostage, or LeBron held the team hostage. It's like, oh, Brent Seabrook has one? Okay. Like, it's a different thing in terms of power in the NHL.
Absolutely.